Okay, welcome everyone. Today we will have a talk by Steve Tonneau from the University of Edinburgh. Steve did his PhD in Rennes in France, where he worked on animating virtual characters for computer graphics. In 2015, he joined Last CNS in Toulouse in France as a postdoc, where he worked on humanoid contact planning. And since 2019, Steve is a lecturer at the University of Edinburgh. And I guess Steve is most known for his work on pioneering the whole guide path approach to contact planning, where we use simplified models to plan contact sequences. And yeah, I'm really happy that Steve was able to join us today, and I'm really looking forward to your talk. So Steve, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Andreas. So hello, everyone. First, I would like to thank Andreas and all of you again for welcoming me, even if it's virtually, to your research group. I'm really happy to be here. I want to insist on that. I'm going to share my slides at the same time that I'm talking. Yeah, hopefully everyone can see my screen now.
Yes, it works.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. So before we move on to the presentation, I would just like to say a few things. So I've talked with Andreas. I try to keep this presentation rather short because I'm really interested in having a discussion. Okay. So I'm actually really happy that all of you have also their cameras on, because I don't know if you are teaching, but my students, teaching with students at the moment is talking to an empty computer screen. It's a bit depressing. So please do not hesitate to interfere, to challenge whatever opinion I express. I'm really happy to have a discussion here today. And importantly, I encourage you to do so because you probably know, so we are going to talk about locomotion and locomotion of leg robots. It's a really vast topic. And I'm going to take a lot of shortcuts here because I want to talk about a specific aspect of locomotion, but I'd be more than happy to discuss about other parts of locomotion if it proves relevant. So yeah, just saying that, please feel free to interrupt at any time. I don't know if I can, yeah. Okay, I do it like this because I'm not sure you want to see your own faces on the screen, and I get started then. Okay, so again, I'm Steve Tonneau from the University of Edinburgh, and I like to talk about locomotion for leg robots. Specifically, I'd like to talk about a problem that we call the contact planning problem, which is a problem that we are very familiar with as human beings, right? Whenever we walk, we have to constantly decide where we are going to step in order to move closer to our objective. So if you consider the pictures, the picture on this introduction slide here, what you can see is the Talos robot navigating somehow in a structured environment. And some of the interesting questions that we can ask ourselves is starting from the bottom right position and we want to compute a motion that will allow the robot to get to the end of the platform. So how many steps should we make to reach our objective? And where should each step be created? Are questions that we want to ask ourselves. And of course, we want to ask them formally and try to propose efficient solutions to it. In particular, today, I would like to discuss the combinatorial aspect of these questions and propose some possible avenues of research to address it. So why is this problem interesting? It's in a larger context, which is an issue related to a lot of people in the community. What we want to do is we want to provide leg robots, such as the HRP2 robot that you are seeing here, with an autonomy of motion. That is that we want to provide our robots with the ability to navigate among a large variety of environments without requiring any human intervention at all. And unfortunately, leg locomotion is associated with a large variety of open problems that I'm going to briefly mention here. So the first problem that we have to consider is that we are working in a high dimensional space. So if we are trying to plan a motion for a humanoid robot with 30 degrees of freedom, such as the HRP2 robot that you see here, we have to plan in a dimension of about 100. And of course, this is a large dimensional space. But additionally, in all the possible postures that we'll find on this space that we call the configuration space, obviously, we are not really interested in the posture that you see on the left here. I'm just going to use this pointer, right? Because we know that for leg robots and for humans, we are interested in contact postures. And this contact manifold, as we call it, which is just the subspace of all configurations that are in contact, it has what we call a null measure in the configuration space. It means that if you try to randomly sample a configuration for your robot, you will never reach a contact configuration. So we have algorithms to try to find these contact postures, but they are quite expensive. And just to say, this is just to say that the search is not trivial at all. Another issue that we have is that we have constraints on the motion of the robots, which are the same than constraints that apply for humans. We have geometric constraint because of the articulation of the robots. We call them joint limits. And we have also dynamics constraints. The robots obey to the laws of physics. And those constraints, actually, they are dependent on the choices of contact that we make, right? If you look on the picture on the left, in fact, if the robot manages to reach that situation, he will be stuck, actually. HRP2 is not powerful enough to be able to raise this foot here and safely get to the other end of the platform because his dynamic constraints do not allow for it. This option on the right here with a step on the inclined platform with the left foot is actually a safer approach to allow the robot to navigate. So because these constraints are nonlinear and also they change discontinuously whenever we create or break contacts, I think everyone can imagine here that the search is even more complex because of the formulation of these constraints. Other set of constraints that are also nonlinear and that we need to consider are, of course, collision constraints, such as the ones that you see here in these kind of pretty examples. But in general, because we have to create contacts, it means that we have to be close to the obstacle of the environment. And sometimes those are robots, and we really need to find a way to avoid having collision with them. So when you consider all these issues together, and this is a claim that I'm willing to make, you have to reach the conclusion that locomotion is too hard to be tackled in a brute force approach. It's really, for me, a hopeless problem. And to get out of it, to try to solve it in any way, what we need to do is we need to cheat. Okay? And by cheating, what I mean is to propose heuristics. I am a strong defender of heuristics. I think heuristics are good. We need to find reduced model. We need to find any kind of approximations that will help us finding efficient solution to the leg locomotion problem. And of course, when we decide to make this approximation, this has a cost, clearly. And I think the cost is overall obvious for everyone. Because you make approximation, you will make errors in your formulation. You might end up with motions that are not feasible. You might not find a solution even if it exists, and so on. I would not like to discuss too much about the cost here today, but I would be happy to discuss it if it's of interest for some people. I just want to say that the general approach that is motivated by the difficulty of the problem is to cheat again and to make simplifying assumptions. One important simplifying assumption that has been made during my PhD and that I would say has influenced the way of working in the different labs that I've joined, especially the last CNRS in Toulouse, is to say that we make the assumption that we can divide the issue of leg locomotion into 3 different problems, which we call P1, P2, and P3. This assumption is false, okay? Just to be clear, but we just made the assumption that the problems could be solved sequentially. We say that we could first considering the problem of going from this position here to this position here, we could first just focus on finding a trajectory for the root of the robot without considering its end effectors or all of its articulation. And then we said that once we fix that trajectory, we can explore its neighborhood to generate a discrete sequence of contact postures, such as the one that you see here, that will describe the motion that will be required to accomplish the task. And then we have a last problem, which is called P3, which has to interpolate all of those contact postures into a feasible motion. And the assumption here is to say that these problems are sequentially independent. And it means that when we solve the first problem P1 here, we are certain that the solution that we find for P1 will lead to a feasible problem P2, which means that we will be able to find a feasible contact sequence, and a problem P3, which means that we will be able to generate a whole body motion. So there is this notion of what we call the feasibility domain here, that says when I'm solving the problem P1, I'm solving it in such a way that I have guarantees that I can solve the problem P2 and P3 based on the output of P1. Please interrupt me if this is not clear. Yes.
Oh, sorry, I was just adding a comment. In AI, you would call this refinement guarantee, right? When you have a symbolic plan, and when the symbolic plan is feasible, you have a guarantee that you can find a sub-symbolic solution.
Yeah, so, okay. I didn't know the term, to be honest, but yeah, I believe this is essentially the same thing, exactly. Yeah. So the refinement guarantee, I like this term. I'll try to keep it for the rest of the talk, at least. Thanks for the comment. And the issue that we have is that we cannot obtain this guarantee. Again, because of the complexity of the problem, we cannot obtain this guarantee. And so the idea is to introduce empirical approximation of this guarantee and cross our fingers in the hope that we will be able to converge to a feasible solution. And so what we are going to be interested in mostly today is the problem P2, okay? Just considering a gate path and then discretizing it into a sequence of contact surface. But just to illustrate a bit some kind of reductions that this approach led to, especially for the problem P1. The first cheating assumption that we introduced was to say that if we consider a robot such as this one, this is the HiQ robot from RIT, we're going to say, I'm not interested in this robot because he has too many degrees of freedom. The search is too complex. So I'm not interested in that. I just want to work with the simplest form. And we had this idea of having this dual form here, where you have a red shape that is an approximation or bounding box of the trunk of the robot. And here you have these kind of green bubbles, which are a convex approximation of the reachable workspace of the robot. And this is a kind of a naive cheating assumption, but it's a really interesting one because it actually gives a measure to the contact manifold. If you decide to work with this simplified shape here, what you can say is that if you want to be able to generate contact with the environment, well, a necessary condition, of course, is that the reachable workspace, that is the green bubbles here, they have to be in collision with the environment. And also another important condition is to say that on the other hand, this red shape here, that is the trunk, ideally it should not be in collision with the environment if you want to have serious guarantees that you won't have a collision. The true implementation of this is a bit more complex than that, but I think I like to keep this idea simple, just saying, okay, I have things that I want to collide and I have things that I do not want to collide. And maybe this is a good enough assumption that if I plan a guide path for the trajectory of my robot, such as this one here, well, you can see that at every time step, you will always have a collision between the green bubbles and the environment. This is a reasonable trajectory for the root of my robot, and I'm going to try to exploit it to generate a contact sequence. And again, I'm not claiming that this is a 100% accurate guarantee. I'm just saying that empirically, if you work a bit around this idea, you can get some interesting results. Okay. So why do we do this? Obviously, we use it to reduce the dimensionality of the problem and to find solution much more faster. Another set of assumptions that we make quite commonly in the robotics is, again, dimensionality reduction, which is to say that I mentioned geometric or kinematic constraints and dynamic constraints that apply on a robot. And what we do in general is we say we're going to just consider part of the dynamics of the robot. We're just going to be really interested in the contact positions. And we're going to consider how these contact positions, they impose constraints on the center of mass of the robot. So we will not consider the whole body. So basically, we will work in dimension 3, that is the dimension of the center of mass, plus 6 times the number of effectors in contact here. 6 because you work in 6D, you have a position and orientation for each one of your foot. And when you make this kind of assumptions, what we have proposed in the past is efficient approximation on the kinematic constraint. So for instance, the green polytope that you see here, it's an approximation of the set of all the positions that the center of mass can reach when those effectors are in contact. So it's an approximation of the kinematic constraints. Other set of conservative assumptions that we are made here, those are not an approximation, those are conservative assumptions. It's a bit different because you have guarantees, which is if you make those conservative assumptions, you can find yourself in situations when the dynamics, the equations of dynamics for your robots, they will become linear. Okay, those are rather conservative assumptions, but they still allow us to generate motions such as the one that you have seen here. And the reason why I'm showing all of this is just to say that you will see that I have a tendency to try to simplify all the nonlinearities and discontinuities of our problem into linear equalities and inequalities in general, because I tend to think that we can use convex reformulations of the problem to find a solution to it. And again, today, I don't want to talk about whether this is a good idea or not to use those convex relaxation. We're just going to assume that they are given and that they work well, okay? And my point is that even if we simplify that much the problem, we are still left with a combinatorial problem, which is the focus of the presentation that I want to have today, okay? So what problem are we considering? This is the contact planning problem. I call it the contact planning problem, but for the remainder of the presentation, we're really going to talk about footstep planning, okay? We're going to consider cyclic locomotion. So for humanoid robots, such as Talos that you can see here, we're just going to talk about left foot, right foot. So we do not make assumption of the gaits of the robot. We don't have to find them, they are given. This will simplify the problem, and we will discuss briefly towards the end how we can extend the approach that we have. So how to reach the blue platform for the robot, okay? And how to reach the platform, what I mean by that is what kind of footstep position should we consider to reach the platform? So we can use a naive approach, okay? Our combinatorial problem, it starts with the selection of the very first step. Arbitrarily, we can decide to start with the left foot, for instance, and to place the foot at the red position that you can see here. We can decide to go in a straight line, because why not? This will tells us that we will then place our right foot here. And already we find ourselves having a problem here, because if we want to make a step with the left foot, that is the red position here, given this position for the right foot, we have to consider the kinematic constraint. So here is an approximation of the kinematic constraints. And what this crescent represents is the possible position for the center of the left foot, given that the right foot is in this position. And we can see that if we decide to make our next step on this position, it will not be really robust, because part of the foot will actually be not on a contact surface. So we decide to backtrack to have a safer contact plan. So we move a bit more forward each one of the foot steps here, and then we are able to safely place our next contact here. So if we unroll our naive policy, you saw that coming a while ago, right? We are stuck in a local minima here because we are not able to cross the platform. But most algorithms, actually, they will exhibit this myopic behavior because they only plan a few steps ahead, and which is also why we need to plan the path to our goal globally with as many steps in advance as possible. This, of course, will be problematic because it will increase the complexity of our problem. We'll see why in a minute. So we backtrack again, we make a few trials and errors, and we may end up in the situation that we have here, where we are at the border of the red stepping stone, but we are not able to cross the final step. Again, our plan is not feasible, and this time it is not because of geometric constraints, but because of the dynamic constraints. To cross the gap, we need to reach the last stepping stone with enough velocity to be able to jump. So dynamic feasibility must be considered as well, as I mentioned it earlier. And the issue is really obvious in this dynamic situation, but dynamics should always be considered, even when we are making simple steps, because we make sure that we need to make sure that the robot can maintain equilibrium while we are following the footsteps. So in summary, whenever we make a new step, we must choose a contact surface among all of these, such that the motion is feasible and make sure that it allows us to make progress towards our goal. So if we try to formalize it a bit, we assume for the moment that our environment is flat or quasi-flat, as we like to call it. It means that the platforms can be a bit inclined, but not too much. And if we assume this convex decomposition of the environment, we can represent the contact surfaces as a set of linear inequalities. So any point P that belongs to a contact surface must satisfy this set of constraints. So the big S times P must be lesser or equal than a vector little s j here for each of the contact surfaces. Okay? And at each new phase I, we associate one footstep position pi. And so if we are planning for m footstep, we will have m position of p. And so in theory, as a result, the number of possibilities to find a plan, they are n, that is the number of footsteps, the number of contact surfaces, sorry, to the power of m, which is the number of footsteps that we want to make. So we can see that in theory, this combinatorial is really big, and this is what we want to address. So if we try to formalize it furthermore, we can define our contact problem, our contact planning as a feasibility problem. We want to find m contact position, that's the vector x here, such that the kinematic and dynamic feasibility of the plan is guaranteed. This is the set F here, and such that we have initial and final conditions that are satisfied. So in our example, for instance, the goal condition was not to reach a precise position, but just that the robot lies on the platform on the far right. Okay? And the combinatorial constraint, it is expressed here as a set of OR constraints, because for each footstep position, we want the position to belong to either of the contact surfaces.
Okay. Can I actually ask a question?
Yes.
So here, the decision variable over which you not optimize but find to feasibility is only the footsteps.
Yes.
But the footsteps cannot be solved independently from the rest, right? Like dynamics and so forth.
Exactly. And so I can elaborate a bit on that if you want, with great pleasure. And this is, so the whole complexity of the whole body is hidden into this feasibility constraint that I explained here, okay? Mm-hmm. So if we consider the complete formulation of the problem, we need to verify that for each possible position, we will find a whole body motion that satisfies both kinematics and dynamics constraints of the complete system. And we believe that this approach is not reasonable, which is why what we propose to use is to introduce simplifications on it. So in fact, our variables here, what we consider in general are the footstep position, but also the trajectory of the center of mass. And we will use approximation of the whole body constraint expressed just in terms of center of mass constraint. Okay, and the center of mass constraints, we will consider that they are convex constraints, which is again an approximation, but empirically it works well.
Okay, I get the point. But so here, like this feasibility basically means to state something like there exists also an assignment of all the other variables, which is the robot pose, the center of mass.
Yes.
So that feasibility holds, right?
Yes.
But you don't make these other variables explicit in that formulation.
Yeah. So I tried to be as concise as possible, and maybe I failed my objective of making things easier. So sorry about that. But yes, this constraint here, I didn't want to explicitly talk about the dynamics and kinematic constraints. They are expressed here clearly, because you cannot just reason on the footstep, and those constraints are the reason why you need to plan all your footsteps simultaneously, actually. Because otherwise your footstep plan does not make any sense with respect to the dynamics and kinematic constraints of your robot.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Okay, so thanks a lot for the intervention. Sorry if that was not clear, but yeah, just to be clear, we are focusing on the footstep, and we assume that the rest is this constraint, and that this set F, it somehow expresses all the complex constraints on the dynamics and kinematics of the robot.
So now, sorry that I keep like asking. Now that you put it again, I think a critical thing also in practice is to know how can you evaluate that feasibility. Like assuming that you would have a collaboration with some, you know, mathematical programming expert or so, right? And you give him that mathematical program, and then, but you need to explain him how he can evaluate feasibility. But if the evaluation of feasibility means to solve yet another mathematical program, or two actually, or I don't know how you do it, that makes it very, very, very different to saying, okay, the feasibility is as a set of, I don't know, nonlinear analytical functions or so, constraints.
Yes, exactly. So actually, this presentation, it's a bit weird for me to have this presentation the way I chose to do it, because usually the focus of my research is precisely this notion of feasibility constraints. I usually spend most of my time researching this, and today I decided not to spend too much time on trying to describe them. But yes,
can you mention, so given the footsteps, like the piece, how difficult is it to check feasibility, that is find like the path of the robot?
So to check the feasibility, empirically, nowadays, I think that the frameworks that we propose make it not that hard. So what we do is we, again, as I mentioned, we only express the constraints at the center of mass. And so in terms of the dynamic constraints, we use simplifying assumption. So here, most of the results that we use, in general, we go from a quasi-static position to a quasi-static position. It means that the robot is not accelerating at the start and at the end of any motions that he makes before creating a new footstep, okay? So an easy way to say this is that the robot is moving rather slowly. It's like as if you were stepping, you stop every time you make a step. And what we have shown, so you can, this is what people call a quasi-static assumption. We go just a bit further than that because we show that you can formulate the centroidal dynamics in such a way that you don't have to explicitly stop each time you make a step, but this is some detail. So in any case, if you make this assumption, these constraints, they can be expressed as convex constraints. It just means you can just write convex equality or convex inequality constraint, depending on how you want to formulate them. And the kinematic constraints, what we did, if I may just go back to a previous slide. So I think I went too fast on this, but this is the kinematic constraint actually. So we approximate the kinematic constraint with a set of linear equalities. We make the hypothesis that the constraints they are independent of each contact. It means that we can express for the foot position that you can see here, we can have a set of constraints on the center of mass. And actually a convex approximation of this constraint, we have realized that it's quite accurate. And you can express the constraint of the center of mass for each active contact. And you take the intersection of this constraint. This is where you make a hypothesis of independence that is actually whether false. But basically, this is to say that what you assume is that the geometric constraints they are given by a 3D convex polytope. If you take some precautions, what we have seen is that actually you can get a pretty accurate modelization of your constraints when you do that. But when I say pretty accurate, it means that if you are very careful, you will get a 90% success rate, which means that you have still 10% of the cases where this won't work, okay? But our claim is that even if you are not exactly accurate, you are still in the neighborhood of a feasible solution in such way that once you have fixed your contact, we believe that you will still be able to find a feasible trajectory in the neighborhood of the contact plan that you decide. So what we are trying to do here is simply to find a plan where we fix the variables, and then the constraint that we put on the center of mass, they are just used as an estimation of the real constraints of the center of mass. But empirically, what we find is that they are often sufficient to allow us to find a solution. But to be perfectly clear, clearly, we don't have any guarantees here.
Steve, just
yes.
As far as I understood that, you have several levels of abstraction also at this stage, right? So you don't directly optimize over like the kinematics and the velocity, but you first try to optimize over like center of mass, and then you do another step towards kinematics, right? Is that all?
So, in fact, so to give you the full pipeline, that way I think it will be clearer. So what we do is we first fix the contact sequence. Then we plan for a center of mass trajectory given the fixed contact sequence. Once we have the center of mass trajectory, we solve an inverse kinematics problem. That is a whole body optimization. And we get the result from this. And if there is a mismatch between the whole body motion generation and the results from the center of mass trajectory, we do some iterations to make sure that we converge to a consensus between the center of mass trajectory and the inverse kinematics. So in general, this consensus is enough to reach an acceptable solution. But it is true that if the footstep plan that you make initially is wrong, you will not be able to get out of it no matter what you do, because you have fixed your contacts.
Sorry, Steve,
yes.
Just one more question. So as I understood that, so you have this path for your center of mass, then you discretize it, and then you would compute inverse kinematics for each of those points, right?
Yes.
Okay, and how do you make sure that you are smooth between each of those points? Because inverse kinematics could like lead to very different solutions, even if you go like just one step forward, yes. Right?
So the inverse kinematics, in fact, so you have two ways of doing this. Either your discretization is really coarse and you have continuity constraints between the different stages of your inverse kinematics. Either you use curves to model the motion as a continuous function of each of the articulation. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
And so basically, yes, this is really what I'm talking about is nothing new. It's really the standard approach in robotics. You always have that issue of discretization, yes, to make sure that you can guarantee the continuity in your optimization, but the inverse kinematics is done in an iterative fashion. So you start with the first configuration, and then you move on to the next configuration, and you use as a warm start to your inverse kinematic the previous posture, and so on. And in general, for robotics, it works very well.
Yeah, thanks. I suspected that. Thanks.
No worries. So I think I was here. Yeah. And so we have this R constraint that we want to tackle, which is the combinatorics. Okay. So again, I'm happy to talk more about these other constraints after the talk. And yes, for the moment, we're just going to assume that magically they are super easy to express and we don't have any issue with them. Even making this assumption, what I would like to show is that the problem is still a bit challenging. So again, what we would like to do is to get rid of these R constraints here because they make our problem hard. Basically, it's a combinatorial problem where we, in the worst case, we have to try each possible combination to find a solution. So coming back to the meaning of the constraints, so we have here that the point Pi belongs to a surface Sj if this inequality is satisfied. So because our convex surfaces are disjoint, there is only one such inequality that can be satisfied at a time. But what if you wanted to satisfy them all simultaneously? Well, of course, it's impossible unless you introduce some slack variables, which I call the Cij here. So for each couple between a footstep position and a contact surface, you're going to introduce a slack variable Cij here, and you will introduce it as seen in that equation here. Okay. What does this equation mean? Well, if the slack variable is equal to 0, then you can see that this equation is strictly equivalent to the previous one. Okay, so necessarily it means that your point Pi, it belongs to the surface. So for instance, here C00 is equal to 0 because my point here, because here the point belongs to the surface, and here we will have slack variables that have to be positive, otherwise the equations cannot be satisfied. So now what we have is an interesting information here. So if we consider for each footstep position, the vector Ci that we can see here, that contains all of the slack variables for a given phase. And if we count the number of entries that are different than 0, that is what we call the cardinality of the vector, in fact, we will know that there are only two possible options. Either the number of non-zero entries is equal to n, it means all the slack variables are different than 0. Either it's equal to n minus 1, which means that one Cij value is equal to 0, which is the only option, again, because our obstacles are disjoint. So it means that if we count the cardinality of Ci, and if it's lower than n, or if it's equal to n minus 1, it means that our point Pi, it necessarily lies on a surface. Okay? And so we can redefine this issue of finding a point Pi with this R constraint into a cardinality minimization problem. We want to find a point Pi and a slack variable vector Ci such that we minimize the cardinality of our vector. And at the optimum, clearly, one of these constraints will be strictly satisfied with Cij is equal to 0, and we will find a solution. So those problems they are really strictly equivalent. Okay, and there is a good reason why they are strictly equivalent. Is that because at this point we haven't changed much, we haven't improved much our situation, because the cardinality minimization problem is actually still a mixed integer program, which means that this is still a branch and bound problem where we need to to try all possible solutions to find a solution. So why did we go all that way to reformulate our problem if it's still a combinatorial problem? It's because when we make this reformulation of a cardinality, here, sorry, I skipped that slide. There is a well-known method in numerical optimization that says that you can relax a cardinality minimization problem, such as this one, into a problem that consists in minimizing a norm. And in particular, it consists in minimizing the L1 norm. Okay, so I have not invented this. I have definitely not discovered this. It's just that it's well known that the relaxation of this combinatorial problem can be the minimization of the L1 norm of a vector. So why is it interesting? Because what you have on the left is a mixed integer problem, and what you have on the right is a linear programming problem. So for those of you who are familiar with optimization, you will immediately associate that linear programming, it just means it's super easy to solve. Okay. And again, here, this is kind of my signature move in the research. I stress the fact that we are doing an approximation here. Okay. So just to give you an intuition on why the L1 norm is a good approximation of the cardinality, is because
okay, just one comment. You called the left one a mixed integer program.
Yes.
I mean, strictly speaking, all the variables here are like continuous, and it's just a zero norm. So I think what you call the cardinality is the zero norm, right?
Yes.
And so in that sense, yeah, it's like a continuous variables with a discrete objective, which then for mixed integer programming. But I see your point that you have to solve it with branch and bound. I guess, right?
So you're absolutely right. So I took a shortcut here. I shouldn't have. So sorry about that. I think I sacrificed the mathematical rigor to fit to my speech. Yes, this is definitely not a mixed integer program. What I wanted to show is that what I wanted to say, so this has to be solved with the branch and bound approach, but at the cost of some trivial modifications, in fact, this is equivalent to a mixed integer program because you can decide that your variables here are 0 or 1 integer variables. And we can use a formulation that is called the big M formulation that just says that if you replace the 1 here with a constant that is large enough, constant M, in fact, you will end up with a mixed integer formulation. So sorry for not being precise. You're absolutely right. Sorry for the mistake.
Cool. It's nice to understand. Okay, thanks.
So this is almost a mixed integer problem that needs to be solved with branch and bound, and this is a convex relaxation of the problem, and it is convex only if you assume that the feasibility constraints are convex. Okay. So now, just to give rapidly an intuition about why L1 norm induces sparsity. So just consider this trivial problem that you have here, where you want to find a variable x in 2D. So you have component x1 and x2. You want to minimize the cardinality of x, subject to a constraint. x2 is equal to 1.5 minus 0.5 x1. So the constraint is materialized by this line here. And you can see that the minimum cardinality that you can obtain here is 1. It means one of the entries is 0. So either you have the solution 0, 1.5, or the solution 3, 0, which is where the constraint intersect with either the y or x axis. So if you replace the cardinality with a L1 norm minimization, what I've drawn in green here is the level set of the L1 norm, where the norm of x is equal to 1. You can see that it has this interesting tilted shape here, and that if you consider the moment where the level set of the L1 norm intersect with the constraint, you can see here that this happens on a sparse point. And here this happens on the point 0, 1.5. Okay, this is really an informal explanation. This is just to give you an intuition about why the L1 norm leads to sparse results. And what is also really interesting to see is that with this kind of formulation, we will never get that other point, right? So when you do an L1 norm relaxation, you will only consider trying to solve a feasibility problem and never an optimization problem, because you're not really able to do this. And yeah, just as a reminder, if you use the Euclidean norm instead of the L1 norm, because the Euclidean norm has this kind of circular shape that you can see here, in fact, the intersection of the constraints and the level set will not happen in general at the sparse level. Okay. Yeah, that's just to give you an intuition. This is not really rigorous, but yeah, I hope everyone gets an idea here. So we have our relax problem. I just want to check how much time do I have left. So not that much. So yeah, and just to give you some result of what we can obtain when you make this kind of relaxation. So that's when you seriously try to integrate everything that we mentioned before. That means generating a whole body motion. So what we do here is we use the L1 norm minimization to get a footstep plan. And this is just a verification in a simulator that we are able to compute a plan for the Talos robot here. So you can see that the framework is able to handle non-flat surfaces with some limitations on that. They cannot be too inclined. And you can see here, interestingly, that the notion of optimality is really relative here, because this kind of step backward that occurred here, probably it could have been avoided, right? If you were considering a specific cost. My personal belief is that we don't care that much about this, but this is open for discussion as well. This also works for a quadruped. So if you fix the gait of your quadruped, basically there is no big difference between a biped and a quadruped in this formulation. And this is the animal robot. And you can see here that we're able to compute likewise some contact plans for the robot. This is ongoing work, so I won't discuss much about it. So why are we happy with that? And I think this is actually the part that is interesting in my talk. So the L1 norm relaxation is interesting because in our results, in general, we believe that it can be up to 10 times faster than a mixed integer approach. Okay, but of course, what you pay as a price for this is that sometimes the L1 norm will not converge to a sparse solution. It means that the solution to your problem is in fact unusable. You can probably explore the neighborhood of this problem to try to find a solution, but you don't have any guarantee of that. And so the interesting questions that we might want to consider is, can we guarantee convergence? And in fact, what does it mean for the L1 norm to converge or not? And a more general question that I asked myself when I was doing this work was, in fact, is the footstep planning problem really a combinatorial problem? So let me try to explain what I mean by that. So we tried two formulations of the problem on the four scenarios that you can see here, which are of increasing difficulties, both in terms of the number of steps that you consider and in terms of the possible candidate surface at each time. And so if you just use the L1 norm formulation as I presented it, you will see that for the first two scenarios, you will be able to converge. And for the more complex scenario, you will not be able to converge at all. And interestingly, if you look, when you formulate a mixed integer problem, you will have an interesting metric is the number of nodes that are going to be explored by your solver. And just to say it informally, the number of nodes, you can say that it is more or less proportional to the number of discrete choices that you have to make, the number of explorations of the combinatorics that you need to make to find a solution. And what you can see is that, in fact, I have two kind of metrics here. One is just if we try to solve a feasibility problem. So that's the strict comparison with the L1 norm here. And the other one is the number of nodes explored if we try also to optimize a secondary objective problem. So for instance, if we want the distance between the footstep to be always as close as possible to a reference distance and so on. What you observe here is that it's not so surprising that when the L1 norm converges successfully, in fact, the mixed integer will also converge quite rapidly. A number of 0, what it means is that basically the way mixed integer problem work is that they first relax the problem, they relax the discrete variables into continuous one. And it turns out that the relaxation converges to a feasible solution. And that's not really surprising because the relaxation of our problem is basically weather equivalent to the L1 norm. And then when you need to explore more nodes, so you can see here that you need to explore 300 nodes, more than about 3,000 if you use an optimization function. And for the more challenging scenarios here, you need to explore 3,000 nodes. And so the mixed integer is still able to solve those cases, the L1 norm not, and you can see that you need to explore much more nodes. Now, there is an option that was disabled to obtain those results. So we've been using the Gurobi solver here. And there is a pre-solve option that you can enable that is well known from people who use a mixed integer programming. So you can try to pre-process the problem that you're trying to solve. Again, I'm going to speak on a really high level here. But what you do when you pre-solve is you try to change the problem in such a way that you will not change the optimum of your problem, but you will try, for what is interesting for us here, one option is to try additional constraint to your problem that will discard unfeasible solutions, okay? And of course, you need to find a trade-off because the more constraints that you add, the more each unique problem that you're going to solve in a node leads to a slower resolution time. And when you activate this pre-solve function, so on the first line here, you have the result I showed before with the mixed integer. Here, when you activate the pre-solve function, you can see that if you are just considering the feasibility, so those are the number of nodes in parentheses, in general, you will converge directly to a solution. So really, what this suggests is that for the problems that we are considering, I'm not making any kind of claim to combinatorial problem in general, just to be clear. So for these classes of problems that we are considering, in fact, if we do enough pre-processing on our problem, we don't really have a combinatorial. It seems that you always end up with just one solution. And the question that we wanted to ask was, can we kind of try to use the same, can we try to design a pre-solve function that will work for L1 norm minimization as well? And we tried to do it in a naive way, using knowledge that is specific to our domain. And we had a really simple idea that was based on what we already know from our plan. So the idea is to use, again, the guide path that I presented at the beginning of this talk. Okay? So if you consider this problem, it is rather obvious than it's stupid to consider all the possible contact surfaces at each step, right? If you have an idea of the trajectory that your robot is going to follow, clearly what you can do, you can use the reachable workspace of your robot, and you can probably discretize your path in such a way that for each step that you compute, you will only consider a subset of all the possible contact surfaces, right? And what turns out is that if you tune this correctly, you can end up in a situation where you won't impact the feasibility of your problem. If you scale, for instance, the reachable workspace largely enough, you are sure that if a solution exists, you will always contain it. And so by doing this, you effectively reduce the combinatorial aspect of your problem. And if you decide to combine this to reduce the complexity of your problem and you use L1 norm minimization, then you will end up, in fact, being able to solve the problem with the L1 norm relaxation for all of those scenarios. Okay. And what is interesting here is that, in fact, using this guide for pruning your problem, even actually it helps the L1 norm minimization, but it also improves the performance of the mixed integer, right? In general, planning a guide, it costs about 100 milliseconds. And so we can see that for easy problem, if you consider the computation times that are displayed here, using the guide is not super interesting. But for the problems that are more complex and for the problems on which actually the L1 norm minimization didn't work, you can see that you can gain a significant amount of time. In particular, you can consider this last scenario here. So this is about 74 seconds that it takes for the mixed integer to converge, even if it solves only one single instance of the problem. Why? Because the pre-solve has quite a lot of computations to do, I guess, to reach to define the problem that it wants to define. And those 74 seconds have to be compared to the 500 milliseconds plus 100 milliseconds that would be, the worst case, 1 second, I would say, that it takes to solve the problem if you are using a guide with a mixed integer program. So where do I go with all of that? I don't know exactly, actually. That was the point of this talk, I think. But I think it's important to see that if we take these results, I think they suggest that if we take enough time to refine the problem definitions of the contact planning problem, or at least for the footstep planning problem, we can lead to problems that, in fact, do not really have to handle a combinatorics anymore. And I think using domain-specific knowledge is probably an interesting issue for that. Using machine learning probably is a good idea as well. In the method that we've proposed, of course, using a guide path, it introduces other issues. For instance, what is the discretization step that you're going to choose along your path to make sure that you define such a problem. The L1 norm relaxation, when it's properly used with the guide path, what you have shown is that it's able to converge to a feasible solution faster than the mixed integer formulation. But it doesn't mean that in general, even for locomotion, we have solved the combinatorics of the locomotion planning problem. For instance, here, what we do is we always impose the gate. So what happens if we want to have a gate selection? We have preliminary results with it, but that's a more challenging problem, of course. So I'm, again, not claiming that what I'm saying here applies to any kind of problem. And there is the notion, of course, of optimality. Because when you make a L1 norm relaxation, as I suggested, you are solving a feasibility problem and not an optimization problem anymore. Personally, I really think that because we are reducing model, you are using reduced model when we are making the footstep plan, using the notion of optimality does not make a lot of sense. So I think we do not care, but I think a lot of people would disagree with me. I think I've talked a lot. So I don't have time for the rest of my presentation. I think it's okay for me to conclude here. And I would be happy to discuss about this with you.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Steve.